Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Thriving Adoptees podcast. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Julie McGue. Welcome back to the show, Julie. Looking forward to our conversation today. Really looking forward to it.
Thanks for having me back on.
Yeah. So today we're going to talk about healing, because that's what I'm trying to focus in. I think that's the biggest need. You know, when I started out with the podcast, 2.5 years ago, I talked about inspiring, empowering, and healing, and I really feel that healing bit is the strongest thing. That is the holy grail, I guess, is it? That's what we're all looking for. What does healing mean to you, Julie?
So in my new book, Belonging Matters, it's a collection of essays about adoption and family and where we draw our most comfortable feeling of belonging. And one of the places that I drew on for healing from my adoption search journey was Catholic Charities post-adoption support group. And I write an essay about that in Belonging Matters, about how meaningful being in the same space with other adoptees and adoptive parents and birth mothers, that sharing of the same experience of trying to find a lost relative and the agony of rejection and the up and down of the journey, all the gatekeepers that get in the way. And so that support group was very instrumental in my healing from the rejections and the issues of abandonment that come out when you're embarked on a search. The other really strong support system is my adoptive twin. She and I were adopted together, and just that relationship with a full sibling, being raised in the same environment and having the same attitude about just life in general and the search and where we were has been a lifesaver.
Yeah. So it's all about the people around you.
It is. And certainly for adoptees, being in this space with you, Simon, and being on social media and Facebook and connecting to other people's stories is part of the healing journey, because we listen to those stories and we draw out what appeals to us or fits our situation, and we can be either inspired by it or supported by it, and it allows us to make up our mind what we think about what's happened to us, because adoption did happen to us. It's not something we chose to enter. It happened because we were children and the adults in our lives made that decision for us. And I think that powerlessness of being put in a situation not under our control, and still for the closed adoption people like me, the inability to get information, that powerlessness, we need validation from other people going through it.
Yeah. I'm just the powerlessness. Do you think we feel that at the relinquishment point, and it's embedded within us, or is it something that comes later, or both? How do you see that?
I think the powerlessness comes later, but I think what happens at relinquishment, which we're deprived of, is this really strong bonding with our birth relatives. I was just talking about the same topic with another set of adopted twins who I've gotten to know through social media, and all of us, to a person, wonder what happened to us in the first weeks of our lives. In my situation, I wasn't adopted until I was 3 weeks old. For this friend of mine, Nancy, they were 4 months old. So there's no information really in the adoption file about those first 3 weeks of life. And our adoptive parents can't provide that information to us. In the case of twins, I wonder, were we in separate bassinets? Were we in the same room? here I bonded with my twin in utero, and maybe they even put us in the same bassinet so we could be together. I don't know, but I think that crucial bonding in today's day, like I have 3 daughters, and they've all had kids, and the skin to skin contact thing that they all do from the minute the baby is born, we were deprived of that. And I think that lack of bonding, that abandonment, I mean, it is an abandonment per se, is, to your point, a powerlessness. And I think we do carry that forward, this confusion of, who do I belong to? Where do I belong? Who's taking care of me? Who's holding me? And I think let's use the word wary. It makes us wary of people. It's like the rescue dogs. They're so skittish when you first take them into your home, and it takes a long time for them to bond with you. And that lack of control over the situation is something we give into because we have no choice. But when we take ownership of finding our story, when we go through search and reunion, I think it does empower us to say, I'm going to find out what I can because I need to, and I want to, and I feel like it's my right. The topic of the right to know versus the right to privacy is at the cusp of every adoption conversation. And adoptive parents really want, the right to privacy. They want their own set of rights, but they lose sight of the fact that adoptees really have a right to know something, everything, whatever is available. We have a right to know.
Yeah. As I was thinking about that powerlessness question and the embeddedness, and when do we feel this, right? It struck me that it can become a bit of become a tailspin, like, so one of my, you mentioned rescue dogs, and we got a new puppy like 6 months or so ago, 5 months ago, and it's the fourth dog we've had, and she didn't cry, but our previous dogs have cried. First night away from their mum when they've been weaned at 8 weeks, and for me, that it's a visceral kind of thing. Mm-hmm. I feel that it gets me, that sound, right? And it's a feeling. It's definitely a feeling, and it's visceral, and it's heart-wrenching. And I think, and I sometimes think, was I like that? And one of my fascinations is asking strange questions, such as, what's wounded by the primal wound? And one that I focus on a lot is, how does that visceral feeling of being on our own become something that is a very kind of it's a very cognitive thing. It's a belief, isn't it? That mm-hmm. the sense that we are less than, or
unwanted,
that we're not good enough. The belief that we're not good enough,
or just unwanted for whatever reason.
Unwanted,
we can sugarcoat it and say, well, the circumstances weren't right, whatever. It still comes down to not wanting to be a parent.
Yeah,
it can say that it couldn't be a parent, but
you
always can be.
The feeling becomes a belief, right? And one of my questions that I think about a lot and ask people, I guess, is how that happens, right? Because the beliefs grow. So, and have you heard of this thing called confirmation bias? Have you heard of that? Have you heard of confirmation bias?
Mm-hmm.
So it's I don't know, how do you see it? How would you describe or define confirmation bias?
If you have a bias towards feeling like you don't belong, you're going to act like you don't belong, and then people are going to affirm, yeah, you really don't belong in this group. It's like the lunch table thing. A kid walks up to a lunch table, they're tentative, they try to sit down, somebody looks at them and basically is saying, like, what the heck are you doing here? And then they leave and find a different place to sit.
Yeah.
So
that sounds to me like a self-fulfilling it's a self-fulfilling what's the word ever, and it's self-fulfilling prophecy. Confirmation bias is what happens inside our heads after that self-fulfilling prophecy, right? So what the thinker thinks, the prover proves. So we go to that table, we get looked at like, what are you doing here? And then and we see that proof that reinforces the belief that we're
right.
Unwanted. So it's like a snowball, like a snowball growing, and a snowball of trauma that's growing, and the belief is growing bigger and bigger within us, right? We're spinning out of control of a vortex. And one of my concerns on some groups that I see online, should we say, they kind of validate that. They add to our internal confirmation bias, right? That we all do, all humans, and they add in even more sort of proof, grist to the mill, right? And that takes us spinning further and further down the vortex. And I'm looking at you and I'm wondering, am I making any sense here?
No, you are. I'm thinking about it. Some of the groups that you're talking about, there is so much anger in that group. So if we go back to your original question for today about how do you heal, it's how do you get rid of that adoption anger? How do you get over that? And from my perspective, because I had a lot of anger at my birth mom when we reached out to her and she said, no, I don't want any contact with you. I got involved in this post-adoption support group through my adoption agency, Catholic Charities. And I sat in the same room with birth mothers who it really made me understand what my birth mom was going through. And I think that empathy that I learned from being with those women allowed me to get rid of my anger. It wasn't easy. I mean, you accept the situation at some point. There is a lot of forgiveness towards my birth mom because I have this understanding of her situation. And I think getting rid of the anger by understanding someone else's point of view allows you to heal. And I do feel that, take aside the wonder of who she is and why she did what she did, why she continues to do some of the stuff she does, and because she's definitely still has a lot of shame issues. I'm not angry at her anymore. I feel sorry for her. She grew up in an era where birth mothers were sinners and they were shamed, and she internalized that belief, and she's still shamed. She has not forgiven herself for what she did, which was having a relationship with a man before they're married and not getting married. And then, the shame of giving up 2 children is a very painful thing for a mother. I can't even imagine. So my acceptance of her situation has allowed me to heal. And I certainly have benefited from that.
So there's a massive difference here between, because you said in the room, you've been in the room with these people. And
correct.
They're like chalk and cheese. They're the physical groups, the groups that meet face to face, and some of the groups that shout, talk to each other online, should we say? Yeah, I almost use the word shout. And you make a really valid point here that so for you, healing has been about understanding. Understanding. Yeah. So you couldn't understanding what other birth mothers have been through has allowed you to forgive your own birth.
Yeah. The essay that I write about in my new book, it's called Empathy, the Ripple Effect. And I do think that once we find empathy or an understanding for someone else's perspective, and it doesn't have to be adoption, it could be any issue. It could be, politics or a disagreement about what's happening in your community. I think once we have empathy, and that leads to acceptance and forgiveness, your ability to move on in a positive way in your life, healing happens.
Yeah. And do you think most people see healing as an understanding thing?
Mindfulness is such a buzzword right now. And I think people work a little bit harder at this inner work of trying to understand than they used to, or you should anyway, because I think that reflection allows you to have a broader perspective of any given topic. But mindfulness is part of this conversation of healing.
Yeah. And use the word perspective there. So what it seems to me is that healing for you, and another way to describe understanding is like you've had a shift in your perspective.
Or I realized very early on when my birth mom had rejected me that the anger was not serving me in my life at all. I had 4 kids and a beautiful marriage, and I needed to move on in some way, somehow, in order to return to being, the person that I was before the search. And I think that this whole issue of how difficult is it going to be to find answers? How difficult are the answers going to be? Those unknowns are what keep adoptees from going down this search path. And regardless of what happened in my story, I have gotten to a point where I'm so grateful that I took that step and found out what everything was. I never met my birth father. He chose not to meet my sister and I. I know all of what my birth mother is about. She's not the ideal person I wanted her to be, but I know, it's that knowing that allows you to move on and go to the next step in your life. And I think, closed adoption adoptees in the US, we have to wait until our states allow us access to our original birth records. I was fortunate that the state of Illinois opened that up in 2011. There's still so many states in the United States that are just now considering this on, their state ballots to open adoption records for middle-aged people. And so I think the growth and the healing of adoption is stalled for a lot of older adoptees. And the tragedy of that is the open adoption system in the United States really got going in the 1980s. So adoptees in that on that path have more answers than closed adoption adoptees. So here we are stuck, and the new generation has more information about their background potentially than we do. And that just doesn't seem right to me. Our governments are so slow to make changes. And again, it's that lack of control issue. We don't have any control over what our state governments do unless we band together or have a real advocate to invoke change.
So when we're talking about a shift in your perspective, and you were talking about shame. One of the things that comes to mind is conversations I've had with a couple of therapists is that we expect as adoptees, we've probably done some work before we in terms of a support group, a therapist or other sorts of work. We've done some work before we've gone on the quest for the search and reunion thing, and we expect our birth parents and especially our birth mothers to have done some work too.
And they probably don't.
And they probably haven't. But what I'm getting from you is an idea, really. I think that healing is possible without a perfect reunion.
Yes, it is. Because it comes from inside, the desire to improve how you feel about your life. And we all have the power to do that, to change our perspective on how we view our own experience.
Yeah.
Here's another example. I was married 37 years. My husband passed away a year ago. He's the one that instigated me finding my birth relatives. And I'm in a different place than I was when I started all of that. My ability, I think, to adapt to my new situation that also just happened to me, the groundwork is there. I have this ability to, life is going to get better. I have hope, accept the situation for what it is. And, life just keeps coming. And if we can figure out how to mentally develop our coping strategies for one difficult situation, those tools translate to the next difficult situation.
Yeah.
None of us are immune from tough stuff.
So the resilience that you've seen in yourself has helped you get through this.
Absolutely.
With you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Adoption hasn't been the worst thing that's ever happened to me. So, it just was one obstacle in the path of the last 20 years.
Yeah.
I also had a sister die when I was a teenager. My youngest sister, who was one of my parents' biological kids, passed away very suddenly. And, the tools back then, our family didn't go to therapy. My mom did, and she definitely needed to, but we didn't. And this third book that I'm writing, which is a prequel to Twice a Daughter, talks about all those things. I address this crisis situation that happened in a family and how we climbed out of that. The role that my twin sister had in my life in dealing with all of the things that happened as a family. And I think everybody develops a different set of coping strategies. As a kid, I did a lot of journaling, and I think that's another tool for healing. My grief counselor talks about, at the end of the day, make a list of 5 things that you're grateful for the day. Sometimes you have to really dig deep to find those 5 things because it's, probably a bad day, but What a valuable tool for anybody that's going through a crisis situation, whether it's adoption, loss of a loved one, a relationship that fails. If you can feel gratitude about some things in your life, you're going to heal.
Yeah.
Might be small little steps, but it's definitely a path towards healing.
Tough stuff to go through, and I'm sorry to hear about your husband. I don't think I knew about that. I had a weird thing happen to me 6 years ago driving. So my dad was diagnosed with cancer very late, and we were driving back. I was driving my mum and my sister back from the hospital, and we'd been told that it was terminal, and they wouldn't talk about months or weeks or whatever. They wouldn't give us a timescale, but said it's terminal, inoperable, blah blah. And I remember stopping at some traffic lights, and there was a little voice in my head said, "You can get through this, Simon." And that was really weird for me, because normally the voice in my head isn't the one that's giving me assurances like that. It's normally
our inner critic is pretty cruel.
The inner critic, yeah. So I want to just dive a little bit deeper into this. Feelings are an inside job, for want of a better word or better summary of it. How do you see that? Because most of us blame our feelings on the outside world most of the time, even if it's the weather, right? Even if it's the weather, we have miserable weather in the UK. There's this idea, and people will show you all the proof. The sciences. Oh well, you've got but this feelings being an inside job is huge.
Yeah, I think I think that you're right. I mean, I do think that our situations around us, our environment, contributes to our mood. But here's a good example. So in my family, there were 3 adopted kids and 3 biological kids. The 3 adopted kids, none of us have issues with depression or anxiety. We didn't come into life with that, and we're just not going to have that. The 2 younger ones that are still living both deal with depression issues, which they obviously got through my adoptive mom. So that issue of mindset, my reset is always tomorrow is going to be a better day. My younger brother's mindset is maybe tomorrow's going to be a better day. And sometimes tomorrow is not going to be any better than today. So yeah, I think we're influenced by our emotions and our the environment, but I think the nature versus nurture thing, the mindset that we have going into life is going to help us cope with difficult situations and probably facilitate healing, to go back to our topic.
To what extent do you think we need closure to heal?
Oh, wow. I think definitely we do. I'm just thinking about some of the friends that I have that have even gone to the extent of talking with a medium. And that's not a step everybody wants to take or believes in it, but the mediums and readers that do cards, and they allow people to latch onto something, an idea. And I think those techniques or tools do help a lot of people in healing, to know that their loved one who's passed is in a good place, and that that relationship is still there. It's just not a physical relationship. It's a relationship of comfort and spiritual connection.
So what do you see as the healing insights then? The stuff that we see, the shifts that we see?
Well, if I were to give someone advice on to heal from their adoption anger, it would be, number one, start journaling, start writing. You're going to be really surprised at what comes out on that paper with that pen or on your keyboard. I think figuring out what you think about something is the first step in healing. Find and seek companionship of people that are in your same situation and listen to their story. Those would be the two big things.
The meaning one's a big one. I heard a quote on this a couple of weeks ago, and I mentioned it on, I think, a podcast maybe last week or something. It's a Shakespeare quote, and it's something like, nothing has any meaning until we give it one.
Mm-hmm. And I think as a human race, we are meaning-making creatures. We serve to find meaning in most things. Some things we're completely off base, and sometimes we're right on target. So
what would you see as the off base meanings in, well, your own or people, other off base meanings that you've heard from other people, and what's more on target for you?
One of the things that I've been working on right now, and I think the work that I've done with my group and my social worker and the inner work that I do through meditation and yoga, I have been struggling with why I don't talk to my birth mother very much anymore. And I've come to the realization that the reason I don't reach out is because I don't like how I feel sometimes when I talk to her. And when I boil that down, I come to the realization that no matter how hard she tries or how hard I try, what I represent to her is one of her darkest days, right? The day that she had to hide, give birth, relinquish. And no matter what either one of us does, and we do both care about each other, and I have nice conversations with her, but we're not going to ever get past that moment. And I think there's a lot of growth in that realization. The situation, we've taken it as far as we can. I accept what it is, and I think she does too. She cares about us. She's glad to know we made it through life. We had a good life. So all those prayers were answered. But we're not ever going to get past what it is. She was an unwed mother, and she had to deal with some painful things. Yeah. And I represent that. So that's at the heart of a lot of adoption stories, is the women that were left by themselves to figure out the situation. And thank goodness society has changed, Simon. You know, women can be mothers with another woman. Men can be parents with another man. We are in such a better place when it comes to acceptance of people's choices. Unfortunately, our generation is stuck with what happened back then and coping with that. Yeah. So thinking about it, writing about it, talking about it, putting it aside when you're tired of thinking, talking, and working on it is also a good thing. Knowing when you've had enough and you need a mental break. All of those things will help adoptees figure out what the next step is.
Was she a Catholic then? You've talked about Catholic charities.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Okay. And, you know, abortion wasn't even a healthy option back in 1958, 59. So she had no choice. Adoption was her only choice. And for her, she made the right choice. I suppose I can say for me, it was the right choice, but it's taken a long time to come to that statement too. Regardless, I got the best end of the deal because I was adopted with my twin sister. So,
Yeah. When did you realize that, Julie?
Which part?
That you got the best deal.
I would say when I was in the middle of my adoption search, I realized how lucky I was to have been adopted with my twin. The privilege of being raised with a full sibling is an amazing thing. And some adoptees are raised with a sibling. Foster care system, a lot of siblings are placed together. And that's a blessing for everybody. But a lot of adoptees are, they'll have another brother and sister, but that sibling is also an adoptee.
I guess I was thinking the broader take, this seems to be a cultural thing, I think. It might just be to do with me. I've never been told that I should be grateful. Adoptees get very angry about being told that they should be grateful. And
yes,
and I've never been told that I should be grateful. My mum, she's the one that feels grateful. She doesn't. Mm-hmm. She doesn't say it a lot because we're not a family that discusses emotions a lot. But just recently, I've got a bit more of a clue on that. Mm-hmm.
My mom says it all the time. The best day of my life was the day that I adopted you and your sister. And so I heard that message ever since I was a child. And I do believe she means that we made a big difference in her life.
There's a lot on working back to your birth mother. There's, as I understand it, right? So I used to go to Sunday school a bit in a Methodist Sunday school when I was a kid. I went to a Protestant school where we had a reading every morning and we sung a hymn, but and we had religious education lessons one a week, but nobody took any of that really seriously. However, I've heard that the Catholicism, there's a lot of shame in Catholicism. Is that?
Yes, a lot of shame. A long list of prescribed behavior. The 10 Commandments: "Thou shalt not steal." That whole list, and the idea of repentance, asking for forgiveness, and then repentance, and so guilt and shame are built into the culture. And I think those constructs, going back to your little inner voice thing, our inner critic, they make it even worse. I would think for a birth mother from the closed adoption era, they believed they were sinners. Society told them they were sinners, and they internalized that and thought of themselves in that very dark light, and went through life believing that they had done this very bad thing.
I've never been told that I should be grateful. I've never felt ungrateful. I've never wished it hadn't happened. I've never, nor have I been delighted that it has happened. It did happen, and it's just what happened. It's not a thing that I have a lot of emotion, that I feel a lot of emotion around, but I have felt a lot of emotion around my the relinquishment part rather than the adoption part. You see what I mean?
I get it. Yeah.
The biggest thing you talked about being off base with your we can be off base with the meanings that we put on adoption, and I would say this meaning that a meaning that came to me at 40 that I'd never crossed my mind before. She didn't love me enough to keep me, and that was the most off base I discovered, when I had a proper understanding of what had gone on when I'd got my adoption file. There was a huge shift in my perspective when I realized how off base I was in this statement that she didn't love me enough to keep me. And now there's some things been happening fairly recently where I am, where I'm. It's not. I'm becoming more grateful for it, not because I was told to be grateful, but like a spontaneous gratitude from within. So seems to me a huge difference between this external and expectation of being grateful and an internal gratitude that comes from within, unprompted or prompted by, the sort of kind of like the gratitude diaries. And right.
Yeah, I had a situation happen when I was going through my adoption search and it has to do with that grateful piece. I'll put a different label on it though. I felt a very good friend who I wouldn't have suspected would come out with this when I was searching for my birth relatives, and it was brought on by health issues, so I needed to nail down medical history. She made me feel that I was being disloyal to my adoptive parents by what I was doing. And she wasn't a member of the adoption triad. So she wasn't an adoptive parent, a birth mother, or an adoptee. She didn't have any in her family, but she was sitting in judgment of my situation. So to your point, she was basically saying I was being ungrateful. I use the word disloyal. But I think that's the important thing about your show and your podcast and this discussion is we need to talk about all of these issues, all of these things that come up, because I think the more we talk about it, the more we can broaden people's perspective of this is how we've been treated. This is what's happened. This is what's wrong with this. How do we change people's mindsets? Everybody deserves to know who they are and where they come from and why adoption happened to them. We are owed that because we are human beings. And for the outsiders to judge or offer some kind of prescription is completely inappropriate.
Yeah. Everybody's got an opinion. There's a rude joke there about I can't go into it. Yeah, they're and at the same time, like how do I put this? I think that we need to focus on our inner stuff far more than the outer stuff.
And lucky for this day and time, there are so many resources for us to work on that inner stuff. If you can't pay for help, you can join these online groups. We can go back to the journaling aspect where you can write out your thoughts. There's so many ways that we can cope with adoption loss, and it is a loss. We lost a piece of ourselves, and it's taking us longer to recover it than someone who's not adopted. So,
yeah.
And ultimately, where we find belonging, Simon, which is the title of my new book, and I feel like it is at the crux of this issue. For adoptees, we can find belonging in a lot of places, and that is what we are working towards. We can find belonging in our adoption community. Maybe we find it in the family we grew up in. Maybe we find it with birth siblings. Maybe we find it with our birth parents, but we're always on the search for belonging.
Yeah.
And ultimately, we belong to ourselves, so we have to be true to ourselves before anything else.
Yeah. Do you see many people putting their internal stuff on hold until they find that external belonging? You see people putting their that.
No,
So
I think I have some friends, the adoptees, that I think the search didn't turn out for them necessarily the way they wanted it to. But knowing what it is has allowed them to look at their relationships and where they find belonging in a different way. There was a family we grew up with that we were not related to this family, but they were my parents' dearest friends, and they had 6 boys, and we called them aunt and uncle, and the boys were like our cousins. And I still, I knew I wasn't related to them back then, and I'm still not. But the sense of belonging and the sense of kinship that I felt with that family was a beautiful thing. And I think adoptees, we get a little hung up on, well, I don't know my birth family. You may never know your birth family. You may not like them when you find them. So you need these other support systems that you have developed in your life, and you will probably look at them differently as having more value to you once you figure out your search.
Cool. I'm conscious of time. Is there anything that you'd like to say that I've not asked about?
So I wrote an essay fairly recently that I post on my website, juliemcgueauthor.com. And I would urge people to think about this, as in the United States, we're headed towards Thanksgiving week, right? So we're thinking about gratefulness. We're thinking about thankfulness. And the conversation in this essay is about a women's group. We had been gathered for, usually it was a book discussion, but in this case, it didn't end up being a book discussion. And one of the women raised the question, if you could go back and relive a moment in your life, what would you go back to? And everybody's response was different. So I pose to your listeners, ask that question the next time you're in a family gathering, because I think we learn about each other by their answers to that question. One of my friends said she would go back to the day she got married because that blissful feeling of being in love is like nothing else. And other women had different answers. So it's a very interesting conversation. And one for adoptees too. If you could go back to one moment in your life, what would it be? And spend a little time thinking about it and live in that space for a little bit and see what you think about it. So there you go. A challenge for your listenership.
So we'll link in the show notes to that essay, listeners on Julie's site. And wow, thank you very much for your time again together and digging into this. I think we don't talk, we use this term healing a lot, and we don't explore what it means. And so I'm asking, that's basically the question I'm asking everybody at the moment on the podcast, what that's all about. And, I think one of the things for me is that it's this belief thing. And
the mindset that you can get.
Mindset, but beliefs, and especially this widespread belief that we're not good enough. Right? Beliefs seem more bustable to me than trauma seems healable. Do you see what I mean? But
I think one takes longer than the other does, but certainly both of them you can get past.
Yeah, and healing as a shift in perspective, healing as a new understanding. I don't think we explore that enough. So for me, when I saw that I was totally off base with this idea that she didn't love me enough to keep me, that was the most. And I was reading this letter from her to the adoption agency, adoption council, about the teddy bear, and I was just bawling my eyes out as I felt her love for me, and I empathized with her situation. I had no idea. I read the desperation. I could read the desperation. I could decode the desperation very easily in the letter. I could see the power inequality. I could see the desperate state that she was in, and how much this was hurting her. And that's where my empathy came. And that's when I realized that this belief that I'd only held for like 20, 40 seconds, that she didn't love me enough to keep me. When I could see the error of my beliefs. And I think that wasn't a mindset. It wasn't a mindset shift for me. It was a whole body experience. It wasn't like oh, I see that. It was a snotty, wet, teary, whole body experience, So thank you very much, Julie, and all the best with the second book, and the third book's on the way.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks for having me on the show again. And I'm sure the readers are very interested in your story too, about the teddy bear and your mom, because I think we all hope for that moment where we have this sudden realization that it's not what I thought it was. Yeah. And that's healing in itself. Yeah. Thanks, Simon.
You're welcome, Julie. Thank you very much, and thank you, listeners. We'll speak to you again very soon. Cheers. Bye-bye.